Want to read a few words that we've heard already, but also a little bit of the context to those words. It's Matthew chapter 11. Verse 25 through to verse 30. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Eugene Peterson translates some of those words like this: Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't let anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you learn to live freely and lightly. On the first Sunday of this year, at our communion service, I spoke on these words from the Gospel of Matthew, these words of Jesus, this invite from Jesus to come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And as Jesus there talks about a burden, I've had a burden to share a little bit more on these verses. These verses, for some reason, have not left me over these last couple of months. Does anybody remember what I said on the 7th of January about these words, those of you who were present? Then it could just be the same sermon. I promise you it's not. But I've had this kind of desire and burden to speak a little bit more on these verses. I think it would be good, for any minister at some point to work out what the sort of capacity for remembering is amongst the congregation. Is it like 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Because then we could just go back to the same sermon, couldn't we? And we could just go on the same cycle. Spurgeon once said that you've never truly preached a sermon until you've preached it 20 times. You could do that in a year. Preach the same sermon every 3 weeks or so, or every 2 weeks or so. But there were things that I said back in January, and there are things that I would like to say to you this morning about these verses. This kind of weariness that's been spoken of here, this kind of burden that's being spoken of, this has been described as deep soul weariness. Something that we all experience from time to time, though in perhaps different ways and for different reasons. A sense of burden, a sense of weariness. I mentioned last week this new kind of phenomena of TATT. Anybody remember what it stood for? Oh my goodness, it was only last week. Never mind. Never let the 7th of January. It was just last week. Anybody? Tired all the time, wasn't it? Tired all the time. This new phrase. Something that perhaps we can all say, yes, I've experienced that. And oftentimes we can point to a factor. We can point to a significant factor. We can say, do you know what? That's the reason why I feel like this. But sometimes we can't. Sometimes all the things that are going on in our lives, all the complexities, the bodily frailties maybe, the emotional stuff that's going on, also the consequences of sin. These come into our lives, and it leaves us with this feeling of weariness, of tiredness. Some of the things that you mentioned when Abraham was up here, things like work can be a burden, can weary us. Family sometimes can make us feel a bit like that. Anxiety, worry, health. And sometimes, like peace, which the Bible speaks about as passing all understanding, that level of weariness can also pass all understanding. We just don't know why it is. We just know that it is. It's there. It's present. We just don't get it. We know that we just feel this way. And because our burdens are not simple, they're not relieved by simplistic platitudes. Sometimes people who are experiencing this level of weariness and burden, there's no point just going up to them and saying, look, cheer up, things are going to get better. Or cheer up, I'm sure it's not going to last. There's no point in that. Don't tell me this morning to cheer up when I feel the burden of Welsh rugby right now. Don't tell me to just cheer up. I'm amazed that Wales managed to save the worst till last. And that increasing sense of burden that I feel, heightened by the fact that England nearly beat France. It was so close. No point telling me to cheer up and things are going to get better, because I can't see that right now. But that's sometimes how we treat these things. Not that. That's trivial. Doesn't matter. But the burden that we sometimes feel, we want to say to somebody, oh, come on, pull yourself together. It'll be okay. But Jesus comes with a promise. And on the face of it, it could come across as a platitude. We use these words often. We're familiar with these words. Jesus' words. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. But if we stop to think about the power that is behind the promise, you see, a complex burden can be relieved by the power of Jesus, the power that lies behind the promise, a power that is strong enough to relieve that sense of heaviness. Into this weary world, sometimes this weary personal world of ours, steps Jesus, and he speaks a promise that is both simple and hopeful and refreshing. Come to me, Jesus says. Come to me, all you who labor. Come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. The simplicity of Jesus' promise is striking. The simplicity of Jesus' promise is refreshing. It is unique. Jesus simply offers himself as the solution. Come to me. He offers himself to the solution to all that burdens us. Nothing else. It's audacious. Come to me. And the only way that this is not some megalomaniac speaking is if Jesus is who he claims to be, the eternal Word made flesh, one with God, the Creator. His simple promise, come to me, implies a power behind it that is more than sufficient to lift what weighs us down. What does coming to Jesus actually mean, though? When we read the context of the promise, his meaning is quite clear. It's for those who are and have had, as it were, enough of religion. It's a rebuke to the cities earlier on in the chapter. It's a rebuke to the religious leaders who saw the first-hand work of Jesus but refused to believe it. It's an invitation, therefore, to people to come, to not focus on that, not focus on what others say they know and believe, although some of those things were invariably good. It's an invitation to come to him. And that's the point at which our burdened souls, I guess, are tested, because it requires us to believe in him. It requires us to trust him. We want to rest our souls in the knowledge of how and when our burdensome problems will be addressed. But Jesus doesn't provide all of the detail. He simply promises that they will be addressed. Jesus doesn't want our souls resting on the how and the when, as if we are wise enough to understand and determine such things. He wants our souls to rest on the certainty that he will keep his promise to us in the best way at the best time. Come to me. Cast your anxieties on me. Why? For I care for you, Jesus says. If we go back in the Old Testament to the book of Proverbs, we find something very similar where God, through the writer, says, trust in me with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, and you will find rest for your souls. Our souls find rest in hope. And that's what we frantically are looking for whenever our souls are burdened and restless. We're looking for hope. But there are so many false hopes around. Most of the marketing of the products in this world are trying to offer us some sort of hope. But they're false hopes. They are hopes that will, maybe for a time, offer us a temporary distraction or mask the effects of the burden, but they don't remove the burden. Our burdened souls find rest in one place. I think the psalm writers knew this. They wrote about this, particularly one psalm. Yes, my soul, the psalmist says, finds rest in God. My hope comes from him. The psalmist went on to say, he is my rock. He is my salvation. He is my fortress. I'll not be shaken. He is my salvation. My honor depends on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Jesus knows in making the invitation to come to him that he only is our salvation, that he only is our fortress, that he only is our rock, that he only is our refuge. He is the answer to the questions that concern us, the fear. He says, come to me. He very simply and very comprehensively offers us himself. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But if what he promises us is rest, why does he tell us to put on his yoke? A yoke is placed on a beast of burden in order to do some work. Is Jesus offering us, therefore, rest or work? That's precisely the question Jesus, I think, wants us to ask. What work must we do for him that supposedly will give us rest? And Jesus answers this question in different places in the Gospels. For instance, in John 6, he says, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. Later in John's Gospel, he says, abide in me, like a branch in a vine, abide in me. So the work is believe and connect. Believe and join with Jesus. Believe and abide in Jesus. That's the work. Believing and abiding. Resting on the hopeful promises of God. That's the yoke that Jesus calls us to put on. And what is happening here is a kind of an exchange, if you like, a yoke exchange. Let me read a few words from a man by the name of John Mark Comer, and he writes about the secret of the easy yoke. Let me get the right page. He says, first of all, he speaks about Jesus as a rabbi and said, that's how Jesus is referred to in the Gospels, a teacher, a rabbi, someone that people followed. And he speaks about the rabbi as a sort of a general title. And he said every rabbi had a yoke. Not a literal yoke. He was a teacher, not a farmer. A yoke was a common idiom in the first century for a rabbi's way of teaching the Torah. But it was also more. It was his set of teachings on how to be human. His way to shoulder the, at times, crippling weight of life. Marriage, divorce, prayer, money, conflict resolution, government, all of it. And he says it's an odd image for those of us who don't live in an agrarian society. But imagine two oxen yoked together to pull a cart or plow a field. A yoke is how you shoulder a load. And what made Jesus unique, he says, wasn't that he had a yoke. All rabbis had a yoke. It was that he had an easy yoke. He had an easy yoke. You know, the picture is of animals being yoked together. Whenever an animal in that society was to have a yoke placed on it in order to do its work, that yoke was fitted specifically for that animal. It was a perfect fit. When two animals were yoked together, it was also a young animal being trained, perhaps with an older, experienced one joined to him. That's the imagery, that's the picture that we are looking at here. So when Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls." This is Jesus taking an image from the society in which he lived, and an image that everybody would have been familiar with. And they are hearing that this yoke is actually easy. He tells us to put on this yoke, and it is an easy yoke. It is not a burden in and of itself. And that's what Jesus was all about. Healing people, saving people, bringing people into relationship with him, having this yoke placed upon them. Come to me, all you who are weary. It's an invitation. You know, one of the words associated with the idea of disciple is also the idea of apprenticeship. Become my apprentice, Jesus says. Come to me, join with me. Learn as Peterson said, the unforced rhythms of grace. It's an invitation for those who are tired. It's an invitation to those who feel burned out. It's an invitation to the stressed. It's an invitation to all those who are behind on their to-do lists. It's an invitation to those who have to reach for another cup of coffee in order to get them through the day. It's an invitation to those who realize that actually a spa day is not going to solve this. Jesus' invitation is to take up his yoke, to travel through life at his side, learning from him how to shoulder the weight of life with an ease, to step out of the life of a sort of a society that is increasingly, it seems, burdened and stressed and burnt out, into a life of soul rest. Dallas Willard, another great writer on these sorts of topics, speaks about this when he says, in this truth lies the secret of the easy yoke. The secret involves living as Jesus lived in the entirety of his life, adopting his overall lifestyle. He says, our mistake is to think that following Jesus consists in loving our enemies, going the second mile, turning the other cheek, suffering patiently and hopefully, while living the rest of our lives just as everyone else around us does. And he says that's a strategy that is bound to fail. If you want to experience the life of Jesus, then we have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. You know, sometimes I'll walk along the canal there with the dogs, and, you know, particularly in the summer, sometimes in an evening, there'll be a group of people running past me, a group of runners, and I look at them, and they are amazing. I think they come from a local running club, and they just use the canal for sort of, you know, a bit of warm weather training, you know, and they look amazing. They look amazing in their spandex. They look amazing in, you know, all the lovely gear that they're wearing. I think every single one of them must be sponsored by Nike or something, but they just look amazing, and I admire them, and I think, oh, I want to be like them. I want to be like them. But the problem is I like Mars bars. And the problem is I like junk food. I want to run like they do, but I don't want to adopt the lifestyle that goes along with it. I don't want to drink the juices that they drink. And I don't want to eat the power bars and the protein bars that they eat. And I probably won't look good in spandex, but, you know, I've worked out the cost-benefit analysis of all of this. And as good as they look, I don't want to do what they do. I don't think it's worth the pain. I don't think it's worth the sacrifice. So what do? I spectate. I watch. I admire. I want the life, but I'm not willing to adopt the lifestyle. And that's how a lot of people feel about Jesus. They want the life, but they don't want to adopt the lifestyle. And when I talk about lifestyle, what am I talking about? Have a look at the Beatitudes. Have a look at the Sermon on the Mount. If you want to know what it is to live like Jesus, to have a lifestyle like Jesus, just look at those words. If you don't look at anything else in the New Testament in the next coming weeks, just look at that. You get a sense of what the lifestyle is, and then you have a choice. Do I want to make the sacrifice and live like Jesus, or do I just simply want to spectate and look at those and admire those who do? I think it's worth the cost, because I think you get far more back than you give up. In a couple of weeks' time, it's Easter, and we'll focus our attention on Friday on the cross. And then on Sunday, we'll focus our attention on an empty tomb. And we'll realize that death is always followed by resurrection. And we'll realize that whatever we give up for Jesus will come back to us. We won't really have lost anything. The way of Jesus is a way of life. It's not just ideas, what we call theology, or it's not just a list of do's and don'ts, what we call ethics. It's everything. It's all in. It's a lifestyle. But sometimes the truth, or what we believe our version of the truth is, that gets more attention than living the way of Jesus. Jesus as the way, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus as the way is the most frequently evaded metaphor among Christians. We love the words, and we hold that the words are true, but we don't want to live the way. There's a saying in business, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And usually that's applied to, the profit, the bottom line, or it's applied to a manufacturing process. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And if the results that we are getting in life are not where we want them, or are not what they want to be, if our anxiety is at a sort of a simmer level, or we've got high levels of stress or chronic emotional burnout, little to no sense of the presence of God, if we've got an inability to focus our minds, well, maybe we need to look at the way we organize our lives and see if the system is broken. See if the system is somehow off whack. The definition of insanity, I'm sure some of you know it, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But that's exactly what we do. We get a vision of the kind of life that is possible in Jesus. We go to church, we read a book, we listen to a podcast, we get a glimpse maybe of the kind of life we ache for, of emotional health and spiritual life. Our gut immediately says, yes, God, I want that life. We head home from church with all the willpower we can muster. We set out to change, but then we get right back to living the exact same lifestyle and nothing changes. And we involve ourselves in a spectator sport. The solution is very simple. And these aren't my words, these are John Mark Comer. If you want to experience the life to the full of Jesus, his non-stop conscious enjoyment of God's presence and world, all you have to do is adopt not only his theology and his ethics, but also his lifestyle. Jesus is the way. Jesus is life as a template for our own, taking on his habits, his practices. When I first left school, I was an apprentice. That was my first job. I left school at 16, and I joined the local authority. I was taken on by the local authority as an apprentice. I was a painter and decorator for 3 years, apprenticeship. And I had this wonderful instructor. His name was Bryn. And when there were 6 of us as apprentices, and whenever Bryn wanted to sort of share something new with us, he did it first. He said, this is how you're to do it. Do it like me. It's the point of the program, The Apprentice, isn't it, with Alan Sugar? They all have to go through this ridiculous process to get to the point where he will then say, this is how you do it. do it like me. And that's what Jesus says to us this morning in this invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. That's why the author of the Hebrews says, look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of your faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. It's why Peter would write these words, to this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. That's the light yoke that Jesus offers us this morning, following in his steps.